Gamespace's UV editor is a tool that can be mystifying for many people when they first encounter it. In fact, I've heard a lot of criticism about this tool from users familiar with other similar applications, but I have found that this tool, while certainly a different approach, is no worse or better than most of the unwrapper and mapping tools out there. Now, it is a very different approach, but once you get used to it, it becomes a very powerful, very useful tool for getting a model mapped beautifully onto a texture. Like I said, there are several different approaches to doing this. I'll go over several different techniques in the next few chapters, but first I want to go over the way this tool works, the common tools within it, how to use it effectively, and get familiar with some of the common practices and common mistakes associated with it. First, we'll start with a simple object like this sphere to which I've applied this texture. When I open up the UV editor, you can see the way the sphere is projected as a mesh against the texture. Now, first of all, this mesh does not show up very well because the contrast is not very good with the underlying texture. So I can go here to change the way it's displayed to this bright green color, or to any color I like. I like that green, we'll stick with that. Now, when I change its UV mapping, by default it's spherical because it's a sphere. If I change it to cylindrical, you'll see the way the mesh changed and the way it changed the way it's projected against this texture. Same for cubic, and then for flat or planar. Now, planar is what I tend to use the most, easily 90% of the time, because planar is a flat two-dimensional projection that kind of flattened that sphere into this ball-shaped mesh against my texture. Since textures are two-dimensional, it's just easier to kind of keep yourself in that frame of mind and sticking with flat UV projections. So planar is certainly the most common, and is certainly the one we're going to use the most for the next few chapters. Now, the first common mistake I'd like to address is not turning off your UV projection. You can see here the UV projector is still on, and I need to click on my selection tool here to turn it off. Now, had I gone in and started editing this mesh before turning UV projection off, when I clicked my selection tool to turn it off, for some reason GameSpace usually resets the UV mapping, so any edits I had done would not have been committed. So make sure UV projection is off before you begin to edit the mesh at any level. Now, to manage our view, I'm going to switch over to this object here, and you can see how all the multiple subsets that make up this object are now displayed against this texture. If I want to move around this window, if I want to move around this view, I simply click on the blue triangle here, hold the left mouse button down, and start moving around. Also, I can right-click on that triangle, move my mouse up or down to zoom in or out while holding the mouse button down. I can right-click on this white square to reset my mesh, or right-click on the triangle to reset the whole Windows view. Now, these smaller triangles down here underneath these kind of act as like the hierarchy buttons in my modeling tools up here to step up and down the hierarchy. In this case, if I press to the right, you see now it just shows this one object. If I click again, it switches to a different subset, and on it goes. So this way I can switch to individual subsets almost like I'm traveling down a hierarchy, except I'm traveling down a hierarchy of UV maps. Click all the way back to get up to the top. Now let's go back to just that one mesh. You can see I have selection tools just like my point editing tools. I can go to the vertex level, the edge level, the face level, or more of a freestyle selection, contextual based on where I'm clicking. To actually start editing this mesh, I can grab a single face, click on it to select it, and then use my movement tools just like I was point editing. You'll notice though that the mesh is still connected by this face to the rest of the object, because this is just one object's mesh that I'm dealing with. I can rotate it, I can scale it. Like I said, it's just like my normal UV editing tools, it's just like point editing. I can also click undo, which works well within this window. And a quick tip here, if I hold down Shift while clicking, it selects the entire object. Now, let's go back to that one face that I had before. If I wanted to take this face all by itself and move it to a different part of the texture, like a dark area or something like that, the way to do that is to click Break Mesh here. That separates this face from the rest of the mesh, and now I can move it individually from the rest of this object. In addition, there's a weld vertices where I can take this back down. I can kind of weld it back to the rest of the mesh using the weld vertices. One last tool here that's very important to go over is this selection box allows me to draw a box to select, or there's also a freestyle tool to kind of draw like a lasso around the different meshes. Finally, there's the save dialog. The save dialog is extremely important. We're going to be going over it a lot in the next couple chapters as we take individual UV maps and save them out to get them ready for editing within a 2D editor, within a photo editor to start painting our actual texture. So, these are some of the basic tools within the UV mapping editor, so hopefully this won't be too intimidating and we can dive right in the next chapter.